costs. Costs are in the short run and in the long run. What we focus tonight in this particular lecture is production and cost in the short run. It also means we have to define what short run is, which is coming within a few minutes. So, first and foremost, what is a production function? A production function is a function or the relationship between inputs and the maximum or best possible output that we can produce from those inputs. Or inputs and the most efficient output that we can get. Because you can use 10 liters of gasoline, and for these 10 liters of gasoline you could use very inefficient furnace or very inefficient car or very inefficient truck. So what we're trying to see is what is the most efficient way of, let's say, transporting a certain amount of goods. Let's say 1 ton of cement in 5 kilometers with particular amount of gasoline. So efficiency is extremely important. This is also the second subtopic over here, technical efficiency. And this is achieved when you get the maximum amount of output produced with a given combination of inputs. So you provide a certain amount of inputs. What is the maximum output? When you are producing maximum output, you say that you are at the technically efficient point, or that you are producing efficiently. Alright? And then you have economic efficiency. Economic efficiency is associated with cost. It is associated with producing a given output with a minimum amount of cost. Now, what is important to understand is that you may have one particular technical efficiency, but it does not necessarily mean that it is also the most economically efficient. For example, you may have a particular element which is extremely technically efficient, like gold. Gold doesn't rust, and gold has beautiful electrical engineering properties and whatnot, but gold is too expensive. Technical efficiency of silver. Silver is absolutely perfect electric conductor, meaning the resistance of electric resistance on silver is extremely small. If you want to make a 1 kilometer wire, the best thing to make it of is, of course, silver. But silver is 10, 20, 50 times more expensive than copper. Alright? So, it may turn out that, of course, specific wires are made out of silver are by far the most technically efficient, but certainly using silver for wires is definitely not economically efficient. You'd rather use copper instead. Alright, so economic efficiency is associated with the lowest possible cost. A different way of saying is that economic efficiency is associated with minimizing cost for a particular output. In other words, you can produce one car. What is the lowest cost technology that you can use? In other words, the technology which will give you the lowest cost, not the most efficient. Alright, so inputs in any production process are either fixed or variable. Fixed input is an input which does not change with the quantity. In other words, whether you produce 2 units or 20 units or 200 units, the cost remains unchanged. We said very early on in this course that whether the MBA program produces 2 or 20 or 50 or even 200 students, fixed cost will be the number of rooms. We have 6 rooms to teach, and 6 rooms are good enough both for 2, for 20, and for 200 students. The heating of those rooms is more or less, or the air conditioning remains unchanged. Variable cost is the cost which changes with the quantity. You produce a certain machine, it requires certain electricity to run to produce it. The electricity is directly proportional to the machines. Variable cost will be, in the MBA program, for every student, a textbook. 20 students, 20 textbooks. 200 students, 200 textbooks. Alright, so that will be an example of a variable cost. We have, it's not in the textbook, like quasi-variable cost. Number of professors will be quasi-variable. It's kind of like variable, it's kind of like fixed. A professor can easily serve 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 10, 12, 20 students. American University in Bulgaria, we easily stretch to 30 and 35 student groups, but that's kind of like pushing it to the limit, pushing it to the extreme. The optimal is 15, exactly the size of your class that is here today. And you jump over from 35 to 38 or 40, and suddenly one professor, which is a fixed cost, suddenly becomes 2 professors. Then 40, 41, 42, 45, 50 students, still remains literally 2 professors. Then you move to 60 and maybe 70. Now you jump from 2 to 3. Alright? So this is the concept of a quasi-variable or quasi-fixed input. Alright? Oh, let's see what they have here. Oh, they have it here. An input employing a fixed amount for any positive level of output, but need not be 0. So, what I've been explaining is the broader concept of a quasi-variable cost. What they mean by quasi, in this case, fixed cost, is if you don't produce, if you produce 0, you don't use it. If you produce more than 0, then you use it. An example will be a dentist and his secretary. The dentist treats nobody. He takes, of course, a vacation. The secretary takes for 3 weeks a vacation. The ice cream stand. In Bulgaria, for example, ice cream will be sold on the street. You walk down the street and the kid, 7-year-old kid, is going to be waving you to sell you. Well, if there is any selling of ice cream, the ice cream stand will be there. There will be cost to bring it in, to keep it running, and possibly even to pay a particular fee to the municipality. You've got to pay to the municipality 20 euro for using 1 square meter of space. So you got a certain fee, it's got a certain cost, as long as you're producing 1, 2, or 50 ice creams, or 500 ice creams, right? It's still the same. You still got to pay the kid 50 bucks for the day, and you still got to pay the government and whatnot. But if you're selling 0, meaning producing 0, the cost is plain 0. You don't pay the kid anything, you don't pay the government anything for the spot, right? So that will be an example.
What's another word for quasi?
Quasi is kind of like somewhat but not really. Somewhat but not really. It's fixed but not quite fixed. It's almost fixed. Quasi is kind of like almost but not really, not genuine. Alright, so, and I also described you a variable, quasi-variable. Sometimes it is known as stepwise variable. In other words, over one particular range, it's fixed. Over the next range, it's fixed, but at a higher level. Over the next range, 70 to 100 students, it's fixed, but at a third level, still higher level. So this is kind of like stepwise variable, quasi-variable. Again, different types of inputs. Alright, let's see what's next. We have short run and we have long run. In economics, short run or long run doesn't mean 3 months, 6 months, 2 years, 5 years. It means whether inputs are fixed or whether inputs are variable. Long run is defined as all inputs are variable. Short run is defined as at least one input is fixed. Typically, most of the time, but not always, the one that is fixed is capital, because capital usually takes a lot of time to accumulate and whatnot. And the variable is assumed to be labor, although not always. Now, those industries which are relatively capital intensive, one of the most capital intensive will be nuclear energy or oil energy. The long run could be 5, 8, or 10 years down the road. In other words, for the next 10 years, you're stuck with this nuclear plant, you're stuck with your refinery and everything else. In other words, it takes 10 years to develop a new oil field or a new refinery and whatnot. For others, it might be a lot less. The example of very short run for the ice cream could be, I don't know, 1 week. You know, how long does it take to get another ice cream stand and another kid to double, you know, 2 kids selling ice cream instead of 1?
Okay, so in oil, short term is...
Short term, 2 years is still short term. 3 years is still short term. 5 years for the most part is still short term. You're trying to develop, let's say, shale oil. It's going to take 10 years. It's going to take 10 years to get it up and running. When you get it up and running at a certain capacity, you want to double or triple the capacity, it's going to take another 5 or another 8 years to expand capacity. In other words, a short run is whenever you're stuck with a particular capacity. That's the way to think. That's not the technical. The correct technical way to think is at least one input is fixed. That's the only correct definition. But you can't think in that. You know, the way to think is, if I really want to increase my capacity, how long it's going to take me to do that? Or you are having oversupply for whatever reasons. You're having what's called excess capacity, and you want to cut out half of your capacity. How long it's going to take to get rid of 1 ice cream stand and 1 kid? Well, it could literally take 1 day. You know, at the end of the day, the kid and the stand is gone. And stand costs $20 or $50. The whole stand, I mean, it's not right, nothing really technological. They just throw it in the junk, and that's the end of the story. But how long does it take to scrap, let's say, oil refinery or an oil well? Well, if you got an oil field with oil wells and the oil wells are up and running, you can't easily scrap them. If you scrap them, you might lose the whole oil well. In other words, you're going to run. So sometimes you are stuck with certain capacity and you can't just cut it in half easily within a couple of months. Or you want to double the capacity, you can't just easily double the capacity. For example, we try to triple the capacity of the MBA program. We don't have the rooms, all right? We might be able to hire 5 more professors, but we don't have the rooms, right? So that's the difference between short run and long run. Long run, when everything is adjustable. Of course, it is always assumed to be adjusted to the most efficient, technologically or more likely economically efficient setup. Alright, as I explained, in the short run, typically capital is assumed to be fixed. Assumed doesn't mean it is fixed. In economics, we assume. Sometimes in the short run, labor will be fixed. How could that be? Labor contracts. GM, Ford, Chrysler, the US automakers, the American automakers, are stuck for 2-3 years with labor union contracts on their workers. So it could turn out that they're stuck with the workers, and sometimes labor turns out to be fixed more than capital. Now, so what this is saying is, typically, in most of the cases, but not necessarily always, capital is a fixed one, all right? And the assumption is that we tweak a little bit the labor. In our case here with the MBA program, the dean just told me we're hiring, or they are bringing in one more professor in finance to expand and cover for demand in finance, right? Students want to study a lot of finance because it's a lot of easy money and doesn't take a lot of hard work. It's not like pulling oil out of the ground, out a kilometer from the ground. You know, you just do financial alchemy and you create money out of nothing, right? Profits for nothing. All right, anyway, the point is the MBA program is expanding. We can't just get one more room. Sure, we can kind of, you know, try to borrow from one of the other rooms, but it's easy to get one more professor, which is exactly what the university is doing. Usually, this type of fixed input in economics, there is a convention. Economists have agreed, because it's nice, to put in a little dash on top of it. So, when you put on top of K a dash, this means that this particular input, this particular resource is fixed. So, when a particular variable is fixed, meaning the same as, fixed means constant, mathematical constant. This means that f of Lk, where k is constant, is the same as a different function f of L. In other words, the only variable in the function is L, and k remains constant, of course, in the short run. So, short-run production function will have one variable less. Neoclassical economics, we call it now, what we are studying here is Neo-Keynesian economics, typically uses only two input factors, labor and capital. And it is convenient and conventional to use capital as the fixed one in the short run. Some other production theories, like the Austrian theory, uses much more complicated production structure of higher order, lower order, etc., which we are not covering here today. Alright, let's see what's next. The average product of labor. Average product of labor is perfectly natural concept. It simply means the total quantity of output divided by the total quantity of labor. An example will be, if I'm just picking numbers that they are not real, 4 professors were serving this MBA program, and right now the MBA program has 40 students, then the average productivity in this case of labor will be 10 students per professor. In the industry, we call it academia, in the university industry, we call this student-professor ratio. Student-professor ratio. This is very important for analyzing an academic institution. How many students you have, and how many teachers, and what the ratio is. So for academia, it represents the average product of labor. So every university will try to maintain a certain range, and that range, of course, will be what will be widely recognized in the world's experience of what is optimal and what is not. American universities strive for a lower number of students per professor, while Western Europeans strive for a higher, and I don't want to get into the differences of educational systems. You're here using the American-style educational system, where one lecturer teaches a group of 10 to 20 students. In Europe, you have one highly qualified professor who will teach an auditorium of 300 students over the microphone in a big auditorium, and then you're going to have 10 little assistants. Of course, they're a lot cheaper and a lot lower qualified. They're probably PhD students or barely graduated, who will be providing exercises separately in groups of 10. So you're going to be getting the lecture from a worldwide recognized professor who's been in the field at least 20 years and who has at least 20 publications. And in the American situation, you might be getting a lecture from a professor who never published in a peer-reviewed journal. that's perfectly possible, right? So, that's the average. Then you have the marginal product of labor. Marginal product of labor, if you add one more professor, how many more students you can teach in a university? If you add one more kid at the ice cream stand, how many more ice creams you can produce? Came to mind movie theaters. If you've seen them on a movie, what a movie theater is, you walk into the movie theater and you have what's called a concession stand, where you have 5 or 6 cash registers who can actually buy Pepsi or Coke, right? Or popcorn. You may have one kid serving per cash register. One kid, you're asking, let's say, two Cokes and popcorn. One kid says, $3.75, sir. And then he walks in, gets the Coke, gets the whatever and whatnot. So that's one kid. Well, you can add a second kid. One kid runs the cash register. When he says 2 Cokes and popcorn, the second kid does the Cokes and the popcorns, brings them to the counter. Now the one kid is doing only the Coke and the popcorn, the other one is doing the cash register. It's a lot faster. Well, you could possibly add a third kid. What's the third kid going to be doing?
One doing the popcorn, one doing Pepsi.
Yes, one doing only the popcorns. It's going to be extremely fast. The other one doing only the Cokes. It's going to be a whole lot faster. And still the one specializing on the cash register. So, one kid could be serving average customers, let's say 3 average customers per minute, 20 seconds, right? Then you get 2 kids, they could actually be serving 6 customers. And then you can get 3 kids, they could be actually serving 8 customers, right? So, the marginal product of the second kid is from 3 to 6, is 3 customers. And the marginal product of the third kid is from 6 to 8, the difference is 2. Alright, so when the average product is rising, then the marginal product is greater than the average product. Now this is a basic relationship. When the marginal product is higher than the average. In other words, on average, each kid is producing, let's say, 10 ice creams. When you add one extra kid and it's producing 20, then this means that if the extra one is producing 20, but the average is 10, this one will raise the average maybe to 11 or maybe to 12. So, when the marginal is higher than the average will be moving upward. When the marginal is lower than the average, it will be moving the average downward. So, the first kid was doing 3, the second kid was doing extra 3, which is 6, the third kid is doing extra 2. So, the third, the margin will be less than the average. The third's margin is 2, the average is 3. So, the first average is 3, for the second the average is 3, and for the third it's 8 divided by 3, it's 2.66. So, if the marginal is below the average, it will drag down the average lower. If the marginal is above, it will pull the average higher. Alright? That's a very elementary and basic relationship to always consider. Alright, and when the average product reaches its maximum, then the average product leads marginal. I will explain and show this in a few minutes. So, what is the law of marginal product saying? The law of marginal product is saying that you can add a few more kids on the stand and you can gain some efficiency. But over time, the efficiency will disappear. You try 6 kids on the same cash register, and the 5th and the 6th kid aren't going to be benefiting much. I mean, what will the 5th kid do? Well, they're going to start pushing around. This is best known in the business as the crowding effect. Crowding effect is you got to dig like a grave. You know exactly the size of a grave. 2 meters by 1 meter, right? And you try to have one grave digger, right? This is one person who uses the shovel and starts digging. Well, if you add a second grave digger, is it going to be faster? Yes, not a whole lot faster. If you add a third grave digger, what's the effect? It's going to improve, but you cannot get a lot of improvement. Now, can you imagine 10 people pushing each other and each trying to dig the same 1 by 2 meters? Of course, grave digger 5, 6, 7, and 8 will be delivering very, very small marginal product, because you can actually get a negative marginal product because they are going to be pushing each other. In other words, you have 10 people, they can't all at the same time, they're going to, bothering each other. So, when the variable input increases, a point is reached beyond which its marginal product decreases. In other words, you add a second kid, you can improve, you add a third kid, you can improve, and then 4th, 5th, 6th, they can't improve a lot.
Okay, so it will bring like a tractor.
Huh?
A tractor.
Yes,
So that's
again, what we are trying to do is keep more or less things fixed. The idea of a fixed thing is you don't bring a tractor, you keep the capital fixed. The capital fixed is like, in this particular case, one person working with a shovel. If you add a second shovel to that person, what's the second shovel going to do? Not much. What's the third shovel going to do? Well, not a whole. Whether a person works with 2 shovels or 50 shovels, his overall productivity will improve very little. Same thing with taxi. You have one taxi driver, he drives 1 car, all right? Is his productivity going to improve if he actually has 2 taxis?
No.
The answer is very, very little. Because when he is fixing the first car, he could drive the second. So during the maintenance of the first car, he could be driving the second. During the repair of the first, he could be driving the second. So maybe if the first car he is serving 1,000 customers a month, with the 2 cars he's going to be serving barely 1,050. In other words, the marginal product of the second car will be very, very, very small. Alright? The marginal product of the third car will be nil. Alright? Whether he has 2 cars or 3 cars, he's going to be serving exactly 1,050 customers. That's it. So, this simply says adding a second, third, fourth, fifth cars will not bring a lot of extra output. Well, is the opposite true? You have 1 taxi and 1 taxi driver. Alright? Then you add a second taxi driver to that same car. Will output increase a lot or a little?
Double.
Yes, or more or less doubled. First one's working 12 hours, second one is working 12 hours, right? Well, could output increase if you add a third taxi driver?
No.
Very little. Very little. Almost nothing. Because they're going to be splitting now 8-hour shifts. When each is working 8 hours instead of 12, they're going to be driving a little faster, more careful. They're going to be eager to get more customers because they got only 8-hour shifts, not 12-hour shifts. They're going to be more motivated, less tired, and all the good stuff. So this is going to be tiny, tiny, little. One customer, one taxi driver will do 500. 2 will do 1,000. 3 taxi drivers will do probably 1,040, maybe 50. The improvement will be minimal. What about 4 taxi drivers? Nothing. Next to nothing. Well, this illustrates both with the shovels, both with the number of taxi drivers per taxi, or the number of taxis per taxi drivers, illustrate the law of diminishing marginal product. There always arrives a time when adding 1 more unit or 1 more input increases output less and less and less. Some sort of a technological satiation. In other words, the way to increase dramatically is to add not the second taxi driver, but maybe to add a bus. See the difference? To add a bus. You're not driving 2 or 3 customers, you're driving 20 kids to school or 30 kids to school. The difference, so it's a completely different story. Let's see what else we have here. Total product. This is just an example. Total product. Say number of workers, 52. Then 112. 3, 170. What's the marginal? What's the marginal? Or the average. The first is the average. Well, 0, nothing. Pay attention. Then 52, you have 1 worker, becomes 52. 112 divided by 2 becomes 56. 170 divided by 3 becomes 56.7. Alright? So you can actually see that the average product, 52, increases, and then falls. So it increases the average product all the way to number 3. So this could be an example of the kids at the stand, or it could be an example of ice cream stands, and have 1, 2, 3, 5, or 10 stands with 10 kids, alright? And you also now look at the marginal. Here is the way to look at the marginal. Try to pay attention on the board, not on the textbook. You see the total product is 52 minus 0. The difference is 52, right there. Next one. 112 minus 52, the difference is 60, right there. Then from 170 minus 112, the difference is 8, 5, 58. The next difference is 50, right? Right there. The next difference is from 86 to 58, what is it? 8, 2, 28. In other words, you take the difference between the two, 312, 314, 304, and the difference is 10. Alright? So, this is the way to look at marginal product. And you see the function, what it looks like. This is the chart of the previous data. The total is total labor. You see, total labor here. This is the total product. You see how it's rising, and then it flats off. In other words, oops. Very little improvement over here, right? Very little improvement. Actually, the marginal product is next to almost negative, close to 0. Now, you see what happens over here? The average, this is marginal, this is average. See, 1, 2, 3. So all the way to 3, the average is rising. And then after 3, the average is falling. So what you see here is that the average is first rising and then falling. Now observe what I was saying or explaining a few minutes ago. Here early on you have the marginal above the average. So if it's above the average, it's pulling the average up. Then over here, marginal is below the average, so it's pulling it down. Then continues, pulls down further, then pulls down further. And then the marginal, you see, is minimal at number 9. If the trend goes at number 10, the marginal will be effectively negative. Now, too many people are, crowding each other out at the oven or at the concession stand or at the ice cream stand. I mean, imagine one ice cream stand and 10 kids rushing to serve. I mean, you can get at most 2 kids, one handling the money, one handling the ice creams. That's it. All right? Maybe 2 kids handling the ice creams and one the money. Right? But that's as good as you can get. And then 3, 4, 5 kids, what they can do. I mean, they can't be very efficient. All right, so this is the basic concept. And this is what we call in economics the ideal supply and respectively cost curves. So this is the total product or total supply, product or the total supply. So you'll see first that it is curving this way, and then it is curving opposite. In other words, it's concave first, then convex later. This point here, L0, where concavity changes to convexity, is called, in mathematics, anybody? It's called an inflection point. Inflection point is where concavity changes to convexity and vice versa. In other words, when the curvature changes from one type to the other. Well, this L0, you see what it actually represents. It represents rising marginal product before the point of inflection, before the inflection point, and then it represents falling marginal product after the point. In other words, the rising marginal product will be representing by the accelerating curve, and the falling marginal product will be represented by the decelerating. In other words, this type of curvature represents acceleration, and this type of curvature represents the deceleration. Acceleration means rising marginal product. Deceleration means falling marginal product. Where acceleration switches into deceleration means the peak or the maximum marginal product, and it also means or is represented mathematically as an inflection point. What else? You have the marginal above the average. So as long as the marginal is above the average, am I backward? No. So as long as the marginal is above the average, it is pulling the average higher and higher. In other words, adding an extra kit which is highly productive, meaning more productive than the average, will improve the overall average, and then you'll see that the crossing point of the marginal to the average is always at the maximum. So it stays from above, it's moving higher, it stays from below, it's moving lower. So the point of where the marginal crosses the average must necessarily always be at the maximum point. This was the one statement which was too abstract to explain then, and I said I'm going to skip it and explain it now. Well, that's what it is. You can also have the inverse on the backward. I don't know if we're going to have it here. So, as long as it's going up, it's pulling it upward. In other words, it's above. And as long as it's below, it's pulling it downward. So, the point of crossing must necessarily be the peak or the maximum of average product. Let's see how this works now. Oh, it's got to be a double tap, right? So, we divide costs in two. Of course, you get a total variable cost. Total variable cost is the amount or the cost of variable inputs. A very different way to think about it is the total cost minus the fixed cost. Alright? So, total fixed cost is the same as fixed cost. Alright? So, it is a natural, logical decomposition that total costs are divided into total variable costs and total fixed costs. You will also have average costs or average variable costs and average fixed costs. I mean, this is just a natural, logical extension. So, this is what it is, and here is total fixed cost. See, total fixed cost, 6,000. Notice, 6, 6, 6, 6, 6, 6, 6, 6, all the way. It is always 6, exactly because it's fixed. If it wasn't fixed, it won't be the same number. Now, the variable cost rises. 4, 6, 9, 14, 22, 34. And now, you see, this is total variable cost. The total cost is 6. You see, 6 plus 0, 10, 6 plus 4, 10. 6 plus 6, 12, right? 6 plus 9, 15. So, the right column is the sum of the previous two left columns. It's just simple. You know, this one is simply this plus this. Nothing, no magic here. Looking at the picture, you have the total cost and you have the total variable cost. The difference is identical. Now, because of the steepness, it looks like they're getting closer, but they're not. This particular difference, you know, kind of like looking at the distance between my two fingers, is the same as this difference. Is the same as this, as this, as this, as this, as this. Alright? So, the two curves flow parallel to each other, although it appears visually that they're getting closer to each other. The answer is, they're not. It is just an illusion of the eye. They are perfectly equidistant from each other when measured in vertical distance. So at any point in time when you cut a vertical distance between the two, you will actually get the same difference. And the same difference is how much?
6,000.
6,000. Alright, let's see. Wow. So, what do we have? Average variable cost. This is what I mentioned. It's simply the total variable cost divided by the quantity. Nothing magical. The average fixed cost is the total fixed cost divided by the quantity. And the average total cost is simply the total cost divided by the quantity. So, you have total cost equals total fixed plus total variable. And now you divide by Q by Q by Q. So each one divide by Q, right? So it is natural that the average total cost is the sum of the average fixed and the sum of the average variable cost. Alright? It is perfectly natural to have this relationship. Oh, okay. So, now we are looking at short-run marginal cost. Short-run marginal cost is the change in total cost divided by the change in quantity. In our case, remember how much was the short-run marginal cost for one? Remember, Q in our MBA class is one more student. What was the cost, the marginal cost for one more student? Almost zero, right. We still need to make a phone call, we still need to put a nice folder, but the cost is next to zero. So, the short-run marginal cost in our example is almost zero. The short-run marginal cost for a barrel of oil in Saudi Arabia is extremely low, maybe 5, maybe 10. Just producing one more barrel doesn't cost much here. Now, in Iran, because it's not very efficient, it takes an awful lot. It takes like $80, $90 to produce one more barrel of oil, right? They are much more inefficient, a lot level of automation. They have a lot more bureaucrats and administrators in their oil company, etc., etc. So, whatever the reasons are, the extra barrel, this is the way to think about it. How much costs one extra barrel? In our case, one extra student. And the answer is, in Saudi Arabia, one extra barrel is fairly low cost, and in Iran it's 10 times.
Is that because they're not fully utilized?
No, it's because they have not been making proper investments over the decades, so they are running with obsolete technologies, number one. Number two, they're not able to efficiently extract the barrel of oil. Technology, we're talking about oil extraction technology, is the best in the world here in Saudi Arabia, with those horizontal wells and all those. There's this extraordinary level of sophistication, including seismic searching and whatnot. You run the seismic waves and they tell you based whether they hit a rock or they hit oil or whatever they hit. So in other words, technologically is much better, but it is also, let's say, there are in Saudi Aramco, I'm just picking numbers for the illustration. Saudi Aramco has 10,000 employees, they're probably a lot more than that, 10,000 employees producing 10 million barrels a day. Over there, they're producing 1 million barrels a day with 10,000 employees again, right? So, again, it now says, you might say, well, the employees are fixed cost. Yes, that's a different story altogether. The idea is that on a per barrel basis, here you have 10 times less employees. And probably on a per barrel basis, you have 5 or 10 times more capital in terms of oil wells, technology, and everything else. We don't want to get into the efficiency of oil of different countries. I'm just trying to illustrate the concept that the extra barrel of oil or the extra strudel, how much extra would it cost to produce? And this is this concept. Wow. What do we have here? We have output 100, 200, 300, 400, 500, 600, all right? And then we have the average fixed cost. So we somehow have to see what was the cost. The cost was like 6,000, remember that? So 6,000 divided by 100 is 60. It's fixed. It's 6,000 again divided by 200 is 30. 6,000 divided by 300 is 20, all right? 6,000 divided by 400 is 15. So, because the fixed cost is fixed, you divide the same number by ever increasing quantity, and the average fixed cost must always necessarily fall as quantity increases, and as quantity approaches infinity, the fixed cost approaches 0, right? Fairly straightforward. What is the average variable cost over here? The average variable cost, you see, is 40, 30, 30, and whatnot. You can do the computation. Now, the short-run marginal cost is very tricky. I could not derive it from, in this table, the short-run marginal cost. The way to derive it is to get the total cost and then compute for the next 100. So, remember the numbers, 40, 20, 30, 50, 50, 50. Let me show you how it's done. Alright? 10,000 minus 6,000, this is the total cost, makes 4,000 divided by 100, this is 40, right? The next number, 2,000 divided by 100, it's 20. So 40, 20, 30, right? You see it? Then 50, 80,
120.
120. So let's try to remember the numbers. 40, 20, 30, 50, 80, 120. Now let's scroll back and see if we got the numbers right. 40, 20, 30, 50, 80, 120. Alright? Is it clear how we look at those things?
No.
What do you mean no?
I didn't get it.
Huh?
I didn't get it.
What do you mean you didn't get it?
The one before. How
The
you
one-
got 40, 20, 30.
How I got 40 and how I got 20. Let's try again. Alright, the difference between 100 and 0 units is how much is the cost, the extra cost? 4,000. And 4,000 you divide by an extra 100 units. So 4,000 divided by extra 100 units is 40. Now, for the next 100, what is the extra cost?
2,000.
2,000, right? 12 minus 10. So to produce the second 100 is 2,000, the difference between these two. And 2,000 divided by
100.
100 units. You see, from 1 to
Difference,
200.
yeah, okay.
Yes, the difference is
Yeah.
100. So over here, you have 28,000 to 20,000 is 8,000. So it takes extra 8,000 cost to produce an extra 100 from 400 to 500.
Yeah, okay, I got it.
All right? So this means that from 4 to 5, the extra 100 units takes 8,000, so the marginal cost must be 80. All right, so this cell has to be 80. And let's scroll back and see it's 80 here, it's 40 here. All right? Now, here's another little thing. This is the average total cost. 60 and 40 is 100. 30 and 30 is 60. 20 and 30 is 50. All right? 15 and 35 is 50 again. 12 and 44 is 55. In other words, you add up the average fixed cost and the average variable cost. All right? Now, how do you get the average variable cost? You simply divide the total variable cost by the quantity. I can pull back the table. You divide this number by this. That's all it is. You want to try it? No. All right. Well, with these particular numbers, you see now what's happening. Remember before how I told you how the costs, were going up and then down? Here they are, we call these U-shaped. U-shaped, because this is like the letter U, this one is like a letter U, and this one is like a letter U. So, what are we observing over here? The same old story, the same old logic. You have this one, which is the short-run marginal cost. When the short-run marginal cost is below the average total cost, it's pulling the average lower. It is also below the average variable cost, it also is pulling it lower. Now, when it's here, it is above the average cost, it's pulling it higher, but it's below the average total cost, it's pulling it lower. All right? So, it crosses the average variable cost at its minimum, and then a little later, meaning a little higher quantity, it is crossing the average total cost at its minimum. All right? So, it is always natural to have this type of cost curve structure. That's how we call it, the structure of these cost curves. It always is very low early on and then begins to rise as inefficiencies kick in. What does it mean inefficiencies kick in? Well, the average costs begin to rise. All right, that's what it is. Or the same logic is marginal cost begins to rise. All right. In other words, you have this one concession stand and you're trying to produce instead of 500, 700 or 900 ice creams. Well, now you need a little more electricity, you need a little more powerful machine, you need a second kid, a third kid, a fourth kid, etc., etc. Let's see what else we have. Well, these are the so-called ideal curves. In other words, the previous curve was charted based on the numbers that we had before. This is the same story. This is the short-run marginal cost. Now you have the average cost falling as long as the marginal cost is underneath, meaning lower, and it crosses at the minimum of the average cost, and then as it keeps rising, the average cost begins to rise. Also, similarly here, it's lower, 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 and then the average total cost begins to rise. Now, there is one last thing to notice, which I did not emphasize on the previous picture, is the difference between these two. Average variable cost and average total cost. This represents what's the difference between these two? Average fixed cost. So average fixed cost always shrinks as the quantity increases. And somewhere farther out, they will be approaching each other. We call it mathematically, they are tangent to each other. They are tangent to each other. Or they approach each other or tend to each other. Alright? It's the same story. Alright? Is it fairly straightforward?
Yes.
Questions? Alright, let's see how many. Wow. Alright, let's see what they're telling us. Average fixed cost decreases continuously. I already covered this as output increases. And we added tends towards 0 as output tends towards infinity. You know, equal to the vertical distance between those two. I already showed you this. The average variable cost is U-shaped. I already showed that part. Equals whatever. And the average total cost is also U-shaped. Let's try to show them. This is the one U-shaped. This is the other U-shape, and this is a third also U-shape, not quite perfect. I mean, some people like to call this is J-shape, but it's still of the U-shaped nature. U-shape simply means it's falling when it begins, it reaches a minimum, and then it tends to rise. That's what U-shape means. Alright, so this is the short-run marginal cost is U-shaped. And the minimum points, I already showed this, lies below and then it's falling, lies above and it's rising. Already covered this piece. And in case of a single variable input will be one cash register serving the customers, and then you have 1, 2, 3, 4 kids. In other words, the number of kids changes, but they always have one cash register to serve people. Input, short-run costs are related to the production function by two relations. In other words, the average variable cost is the wage divided by the average product. In other words, what's the average cost? It is simply the cost, the wage of the salary of each kid divided by the number of customers or revenue, the average product of each kid. And the marginal cost will be the extra cost to hire one more kid and how many more ice creams it will be able to serve, or how many more customers, popcorn and Cokes, is going to be able to make the extra kid. Obviously, once you're beyond 3 kids per cash register, the 4th, the 5th kid will add very little marginal product, but it's going to add the same salary of $6.50 an hour, which is the minimum legal wage. So the first kid maybe does 10 people, the second kid maybe does 12 because there is efficiency, the third kid maybe does 6, the fourth kid maybe does only 1. Alright? So the fourth kid, you're paying him $6 extra dollars for barely one more customer. It's probably not worth it. You got to do the math. What's the marginal revenue and the marginal cost? Remember, that's the profit maximization. Alright. Let's see what else we have. Okay, so we have the product curves. And this is, I'm trying to read this average and marginal product. In other words, early on, the average product will be rising. Rising average product means increasing efficiency. Remember, one kid is doing the Coke, the popcorn, and the cash register. You add 2 kids, both will increase because of specialization. You add a 3rd kid, each one will increase its own productivity because there is further specialization. One is doing cash register only, another one is doing Cokes only, the third one is doing popcorn only. If you have 2 kids, one's got to handle both popcorn and Coke, which is not as efficient, right? So the idea is that as long as you add new people, you are going to be increasing the marginal product and increasing the overall efficiency. Increasing overall efficiency means that the average product per worker will be rising, all right? And then over time, it will begin to fall. So you have this natural type, and you see now the cost structure. In other words, this is the product structure, this is the cost structure. Well, what you should notice is that these are somewhat of a mirror images to each other. When the product structure increases here, you see the cost structure falls. When then the product falls, the average product falls, the average cost begins to rise. Alright? So they are 2 different ways of looking at the same process, which is the production process. So this is a very important summarizing article that these economically are more or less equivalent. As long as you're increasing the average product, you are lowering the average cost and vice versa. So, some people are focused on the product and they're correct. Others are focused entirely on the cost and they're correct. The answer is because the two approaches are mathematically and logically equivalent. Alright? Does that makes just common sense, makes logical sense. When you do PhD in economics, they actually make you suffer to prove it mathematically. You prove it, say, okay, I proved something which is obvious, which doesn't need proving. Alright, so let's see what they're telling us. Probably the same story that I just told you. When marginal product is increasing, marginal cost is decreasing. Yes, right? Marginal product is increasing, meaning efficiency is rising. Well, if economic efficiency is rising, it must be that the cost is falling. Alright? That will be reflected. When marginal product is decreasing, which means that the efficiency falls, then the marginal cost is increasing. In other words, efficiency, you can think in terms of two equivalent ways. Efficiency in terms of, think of rising productivity or average product, or you can think in terms of falling costs. And these are the two. In other words, these two concepts are identical because they represent the economic concept of efficiency. One when looked from the output point of view, the other one will look from the cost point of view. So when marginal product, let's see, which is average product, marginal. Oh, when marginal product equals the average product at the maximum AP, the marginal cost is, in other words, when the one is reaching the peak, the other one is reaching the trough. In other words, the maximum and the minimum correspond to each other. In other words, maximum efficiency necessarily corresponds to lower cost. Wow! End the story. You can turn this off.